Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and well, as you can probably hear from my voice, I'm actually having a bit of a trouble right now. And because of this, in the next few days, I'm probably going to take a break just to recover, which means that this week you're going to be seeing a lot of older videos, and the videos I didn't really get to post until recently. But nevertheless, we're still going to discuss something somewhat interesting today, because something has been going on right here on planet Earth. And we're talking about this. Okay, you might have missed this, but let's play this again. This is a video recently posted by the American Meteor Society, and it essentially shows us some kind of a meteorite entering the atmosphere of planet Earth. Okay, this might sound not particularly interesting, except that in this case, we have other footage of other meteorites entering in other locations, some which are actually hundreds of miles apart, and the thing is, none of these events were on the same day. And so each of these meteorites entered the planet at different locations and at different times, but with all of this happening in just the last few months. First we had the event in Houston, where multiple fireballs were witnessed entering the atmosphere, with one of them actually going through someone's roof. Here's actually the fragment that was recovered by the Ponderosa fire department. And just a little bit before this, in Germany, on March 8th of 2026, a fragment from a brilliant fireball smashed into a house roof in Koblenz, Germany. Now, none of these meteorites caused any injuries, but they did create a relatively large hole in both houses. With the obvious question that one might ask being, is there something going on in outer space that's basically changing the frequency of meteorites? Or are we just becoming more aware of these events and people are just taking more pictures and there are more CCTV cameras around us to witness the events? Now, normally the answer would be the latter. Because of the advances in technology, and because everybody today has a cell phone, it's just much easier to capture these events. But despite of this, extremely recently, in March of 2026, the American Meteor Society released this very intriguing analysis suggesting that actually the math and the statistics show us that something has changed. And in just the last few months. And so in this video we're going to discuss what has been discovered so far, and what scientists believe might have happened or think might have happened, and what all of this means for us right here on planet Earth. Although just so that we're clear, we're not talking about a huge increase in numbers, because meteorites striking roofs and meteorites being filmed by someone is something that's been happening for many years. You can learn about some of the more famous events in some of the videos in the description. But as of March 2026, we've now been witnessing what appears to be a significant surge in large fireball events across the entire planet. So not just in Europe and not just in North America, but in many different locations there seems to be a slight increase. And so let's actually maybe start by looking at the data first, based on the data collected by the American Meteor Society. And by the way, all of the links should be in the description. First, when it comes to the first quarter of 2026, we have approximately 2,000 total events. Now this is just from the first 3 months of the 2026, but it's already slightly higher than previously. And AMS, or American Meteor Society, that's been tracking these events for decades, seems to believe that the nature of these events has potentially changed. For example, here is the graph showing us the fireball events witnessed between January 1st and March 24th in the last 9 years. And in this case, this basically shows us the intensity of the event based on the amount of reports. For example, if the event was reported only 25 times, it's not believed to be as intense. But if it was reported over 100 times, which is what those red bars show us, this is when the event was believed to be very intense and very loud. And that's actually where the real mystery begins. By looking at the top of the distribution, and specifically events reported by 50 or more people, the total number more than doubled, at least compared to the historical average. And it's definitely much higher than any of the previous years, even going back 2 decades. And this is a crucial distinction because it suggests that the change is not because more people are looking at the sky or using smartphones, or essentially have CCTVs and camera doorbells, but instead we're seeing an increase specifically in the physically larger objects that seem to create bright, undeniable displays. Because if this was an increase in just the amount of smartphones and cameras, we would actually see a dramatic increase in all sorts of reports. But the data shows us that this is an increase in intense events and seems to involve much larger rocks. So for example, here's a report of large events that also involved a relatively loud sonic boom. And as you can see, 2026 really stands out. And so almost 80% of these large fireballs in 2026 have produced sonic booms, which is not as common as you might think. In other words, these were not just seen, they were also heard. And for a meteor to produce a loud explosion, it must be large and dense enough to enter deep into the atmosphere. And at the moment in 2026, the data suggests that this seems to happen every 3 days, which is actually much more frequent than ever before. And surprisingly, it's really the month of March that's been exceptionally active, involving some of these high-profile stories and broken roofs. And so on March 8th, we had the European event that was actually witnessed by over 3,000 people. On March 17th, or just a week and a half later, we had the Ohio event involving a 7-ton asteroid, roughly around 2 meters across, that exploded and produced powerful sonic booms. And 4 days later, we had the Houston strike involving a 1-ton meteoroid, with one fragment crashing into the roof in Ponderosa forest. And naturally, the first assumption here is that, okay, maybe this is all coming from the same body, or the same larger asteroid that possibly fell apart and created these fragments. But surprisingly, all 3 events seem to have come from 3 completely different types of asteroids. The European event involved diogenites, or a group of achondritic stony meteorites. The Ohio event involved eucarites, which usually consist of basaltic rock and are different in terms of chemical and physical composition. And the Houston strike involved the very common chondrites, which are the most common type of stony meteorites. Which of course is really surprising, because here it confirms all 3 came from entirely different sources. And the discovery of both eucarites and diogenites within just 9 days of each other is scientifically remarkable, mostly because these are extremely rare types of achondrite meteorites, meaning that they don't contain very small round beads that we usually find in more primitive space rocks. And instead, these are much more similar to volcanic rocks right here on planet Earth, and are thus extremely important for scientific research. And most scientists believe that these HED meteorites, or howardites, eucarites, and diogenites, most likely come from the asteroid 4 Vesta, the second largest object in the asteroid belt, and the object that potentially has somewhat similar composition in certain locations. Now, this is an object that NASA actually has visited over a decade ago, and so we know quite a lot about it. And so in terms of scientific discovery, finding these meteorites helps scientists discover a little bit more about the volcanic history on other worlds. But interestingly, despite both coming from a Vesta-like source, both the Ohio and the Germany objects came from completely different parts of the sky, implying that they were not part of the same stream of debris. And this is based on the analysis of the clustering of these events, which suggests that these events do not seem to be linked in terms of the physical origin. Which of course brings us to this somewhat interesting question. So why is this happening, or what is happening? Is the Earth maybe in danger? Because a lot of science fiction movies, including Armageddon, kind of do start with very similar events involving an increase in smaller collisions. But the short answer here is no, we're totally fine. Right now this only involves very small objects and also very old objects that do not pose a threat to our civilization and do not suggest some kind of an incoming larger object, simply because they're all very different. Okay, so why the increase? Well, right now the researchers from the American Meteor Society pointed to potential explanations. First, it could be just what's known as the fireball season. Usually every year between February and April, the rate of bright sporadic meteors increases by 10 to 30%. Now, we don't actually know why this happens, but it's quite possible that during this period, this particular location in the solar system involves Earth passing through a much denser pocket of large debris, which might have been created by some kind of an ancient asteroid collision millions or even billions of years ago. Or maybe this is what's known as radiant clustering, something that becomes a little bit more visually apparent in this image. This recent analysis shows us that for some reason, a lot of the 2026 fireballs seem to be coming from the anthelion source, or the region of the sky opposite the sun, whereas the location toward the sun has a dramatically reduced activity. And so on the one side of the night skies, the activity seems to have increased, but on the opposite side it seems to have decreased. Additionally, a little bit more activity seems to be coming from above the solar system plane, as in previous years. But that's of course just the detections from January to March of 2026, with the last explanation also being sort of intriguing, but also kind of disappointing. Maybe it's actually because of chatbots. Because of the advances of things like ChatGPT, American Meteor Society now believes that maybe Instead of your typical Google search, a lot of witnesses are now being routed directly to the AMS report compared to previous years, and essentially makes the idea of reporting a meteor sighting much easier than previously. And so this record-breaking witness count could be just the result of the advances in AI chatbots. In this case, this would explain why over 3,000 reports were filed for this one event in Europe, which actually beat all previous records. But despite of this slight increase is still kind of intriguing, which means that we'll definitely come back and discuss this more once there are some more thorough studies, and once we can figure out if this is something physical, or if this has some kind of a different explanation that nobody considered yet. And right now it's quite possible that we're just passing through some kind of an unusual high-intensity neighborhood in the solar system. We're not going to know for sure for at least a few more months. Nevertheless, studying this helps us get a little bit closer to solving the puzzle of origin of life on our own planet, but also helps us predict potentially dangerous events by potentially finding the source of some of these smaller objects. And so even though this March meteor madness of 2026 has definitely been quite unusual, it represents a unique opportunity for science in helping us discover so much more about our own planet. And so for now, this is definitely an intriguing discovery, but we don't really have any conclusions yet. On that note, check out some of the previous videos on similar topics in the description. We'll come back and discuss this sometime soon. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining a channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.